started.
Well, I should probably just say, if anyone doesn't want to be seen on the recording, now is the time to switch your camera off, because we're going to record this one and share it later. So now's the time to hide if you don't want to be seen. And apart from that, Sarah, why don't you just go for it? No one needs to hear from me.
Okay, lovely. Lovely to see you all. I'm delighted to see so many people here and from both sides of the pond. That's great. I will undoubtedly say things you already know, and hopefully will introduce you to some thoughts you hadn't perhaps explored before. Our time is brief, but I hope we can cover quite a lot in the brief time. You have your instruments at the ready, and does everybody have the printed materials that EB sent out ahead of time? Does anybody need a moment to get those? Are we okay? All right, I think we'll go ahead then. So today we're going to be looking specifically at one Fantasia by Richard Deering. You'll notice that I say Fantasia as a way of distinguishing between the music that we play and the Walt Disney movie, but also because we're pretty certain that at the time that these pieces were being written, that's probably how it was pronounced. Fantasy was a more common title, but Fantasia in imitation of an Italian word was also used. So it's unlikely that they had anglicized it further than that. Are any of you familiar with the Florio Dictionary of 1598? It's a fantastic thing. It's available online, and you can see the first Italian-English dictionary published in 1598. I just searched John Florio's dictionary and you'll find it. It was titled A World of Words, and it is a marvelous way of finding out how English words were thought of at the time, because you can use the translation, the Italian translation, to compare back and forth between the two languages. And he was an Englishman writing in Italy, his dictionary for the sake of other English people. And his translation of the word fantasia is a fancy or conceit, a humor, imagination, or intent. So the way we can think of it is that it's like our use of the word flight of fancy. It's a takeoff, taking away from the norm for a little while. And the English Fantasia was, in the Jacobean era in particular, was a flight of fancy that included elements of a number of different styles of music, all wrapped together in one package. I was going to ask for people to chime in, but there may just be too many of you for me to ask you to do that. So I'm going to, I'll answer my own questions for now and just say, ask the question, what might the forms that were popular on the continent have been at the end of the 16th century and the beginning of the 17th century, and the kinds of instrumental and vocal forms that the English were working into their instrumental fantasias were included, of course, dances, also Italian forms like the canzona and the ricercare, and motets and madrigals and other forms that you are accustomed to hearing and playing from the continent. Now, I should point out before we get started that I originally recorded all of the examples except the final one, which is the entire Fantasia. I recorded it at 440, and I've used an online, a kind of a wonderful free thing you can get online to change the pitch of something, but it adds kind of a flutter and a few bubbles to it. So if you hear a little strange things while you're playing along with me, pardon me, I don't really play like that. What we're going to be doing today is looking at some of the forms that were used commonly within an English fantasia of the Jacobean period, and see what it was that the players of the time would have been recognizing and picking up on when they played these pieces. Now, we've all played fantasies, and I think that you're probably familiar with the fact that a fantasy tends to have a number of sections, and each section has its own distinct character. And we're very good at recognizing those characters, but what we don't have is the background of having heard things like them in our daily life that would have contributed to our understanding of the characters of the sections of the fantasies that we're playing. One of the most common kinds of pieces that gets reflected in an English fantasy, particularly in the opening of an English fantasy, is the Italian canzona. Now, you could just nod or thumbs up if you have ever played an Italian canzona. Most of you have, right? Are you thinking about Gabrielli and Marullo and people like that? Yeah. And you know that there's a typical opening that we're so accustomed to playing that we tend to call it the canzona opening. And if you ask viol players how they're going to play the motive that they see at that kind of opening, they will tend to say, oh, we start with a pull bow, because the opening tends to be long, short, short, long. Does that sound familiar to everybody as a concept? Okay. Well, where did that come from? And why is that such a familiar part of the canzona? I'll just give you a little bit of history so we can understand it better. Canzona, of course, is just the Italian translation of the word chanson, which we know is the French word for song. And that's exactly where this idea came from, this musical idea. In the first half of the 16th century, a new kind of French chanson was popularized, and the composer that would first come to mind when you're thinking about it would be Claudin de Sermicy. A number of you have probably played pieces by Claudin, and they're usually in 4 parts, and they usually begin with that kind of rhythm, da-dum-bum-ba. There's a reason for that. It's because the French poetry at the time began with 3 shorter, less important syllables followed by a long one. So you can think of something like tant que vivre, or vrai Dieu d'amour, dum bum bum ba. But it was also common to elongate the first of those pickup syllables so that you didn't start a piece with a rest. So if you know tant que vivre, you know that it begins da dum bum ba, but that when that motive comes back, the first note is shortened, so it comes back da dum bum ba. Seem familiar? It may be easier if you hear it as music rather than me just talking. So something like and when you hear that tune come back, you hear 1. I bet you've all played things like that. These 4-part pieces with imitative sections and that rhythm at the beginning were coming out at a time when publication of music was new and exciting. We know that the first published music that was printed in Venice was 1501. These songs were becoming very popular in the 1520s when music publishers were looking for more things to publish. By the 1520s and 30s, we had French publishers, and they were putting out large collections of French chansons. Those books ended up traveling to Italy, where the pieces were very popular. However, many of the people who bought that music didn't speak French. So rather than singing the pieces, they played them. And they worked very well as instrumental pieces. In fact, they also worked very well as keyboard pieces. So in Italy, the French chanson publications that were traveling across the Alps became a popular source of music for Italian organists who used them to improvise on as pieces between parts of the service in the church, as well as in other circumstances. Now, the nice thing about improvising on a piece like that, it's 4 parts. You sort of have 4 different voices you can follow. The basic structure is quite simple, and you can ornament individual parts. It wasn't long before the Italians started writing their own pieces that were like French chansons, but didn't ever have text and were meant to be instrumental pieces in the same style. And of course, they called them canzoni. As that style became more and more popular in Italy, it expanded into larger and larger kinds of ensembles, past the 4-part to 5-part and 6-part, and then eventually into the 8-part multi-chorus kind of canzone that we hear at the end of the 16th century. Let's play one. Let's stop talking and play one. So do you have your instruments at the ready? If so, what we're going to do is look at the first examples that I gave you. There should be 2 pages that are headed with the word canzona examples. And the first of those examples is taken from the opening of a Claudio Merullo piece. It's just one system of very cramped writing. You all found that? What I'm going to do now is play it for you over the computer in the recording I made, as I said, at 4:40 and then changed. I'm hearing somebody, so if you're not muted, make sure you're muted, because otherwise this will start to be very confusing. I'm going to share my recording, and it will start with me counting 1, 2, 3, 4, so that you'll know when to start playing. Choose a part, and we will play that first example. Too many things open on my screen. Here we go. Do let me know if you can't hear this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Did you all hear that? Okay, I'm going to play it again. Are you ready to play along? Some of you were playing along, but not all of you did. If you'd like to be playing, choose a part. If you didn't play if you already played one part, try a different part to play along with. We'll go back to the beginning. Before I do, I just want to make sure you're all able to hear it. If you're not, make some vivid exclamation or unmute for a second and tell me. Okay, I think you're okay. We'll start again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously, that's not the whole piece. That's the opening in order to give you an idea of the shapes that we're talking about. You heard the long note followed by two short notes, picking up to something strong. So the first phrase, da, 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 is really like three pickups preparing for something strong. Let's go on to the next example. If you're ready, choose a part. The next one, I've given you somewhat more of a piece. This is Frescobaldi coming. You'll see that the same rhythmic shape, in fact, the same melodic shape at the beginning is happening here, and it's working out for a longer time. If you're ready to play, you're going to hear 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you can start. One, two, three, four. Once again, we see that repeated note acting as an intensifying pickup, leading us to the real melodic material that's about to happen. And I'm assuming that all of you started with pull bows, so that when you had finished those three notes at the beginning, you were ready for a push bow on the beginning of the real melodic material. We're going to move on to actually the first composer from England to write a canzona, who was William Brady. Now, of course, Brady was living in Germany most of his life, but and spent the very beginning of his career in Italy, in Venice, in fact, where a lot of these pieces were published. So he would have had ample opportunity to hear the Italian form, but he was the first Englishman that we know of to write a piece in this style. And this is the whole second page of your canzona examples. A lot of you may have played this Brady canzona before. And you'll see that this time, the opening motive that we've looked at before has now been doubled in time. So instead of ta-dum-bum-ba, we have dum-ba-da-dum-bum-ba. Same idea, but now sort of intensified and almost sounding like a trumpet call. Here we go. One, two, three, four. But part of what characterizes a piece like this is that rhythmic opening and a lot of homophonic material. So you may have imitated entrances like we did in the first couple examples, or we could have everybody playing that rhythmic material together homophonically. And it kind of stands out. I bet if you heard the Brady, you would know it was a canzona without needing to be told that's how it was entitled in the publication. Let's now take a look at the opening of the Deering fantasy. So if you have that fantasy ready, we're going to just play the first 19 bars. We're going to go from 1 to 19, playing along with this same slightly wobbly transposed recording, so that you can see how similar it is to this kind of canzona style of writing. Have you all got your Deering in front of you now? Okay, here we go. Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And it came to a lovely ending, didn't it, right there? You felt as though you'd completed something. And in fact, that's true. You've now completed the first section of the fantasy, and that is the section that's most reminiscent of the canzona form. Now we're going to look at a different kind of material that was also borrowed by a lot of fantasy composers, and that is dance forms. And the one that we're looking at is the allemande. So your next section of examples will be 2 pages that starts with the title Allemande Examples. I think you've all played allemandes. And what we're looking at right now is bars 19 to 22 of the Deering. That's what we're going to start with, but I have rebarred it so it will look more like an allemande. If you can you compare that first 7-bar example, or 8-bar example, with bars 19 to 22 in the score or your parts of the Deering, and see how I barred it differently? Okay. Let's give it a play, and then we'll talk about what an allemande is. So this is that example. It's quite brief.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, yep. Why did I get, oh, it went back to the canzonas. It's funny how these programs work. I'm going to try to get the allemandes this time. Here we go.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Very short, isn't it? It doesn't quite look like that when you find it in the middle of your fantasy. Let's look where that idea came from. The next example is from an Almain by Anthony Holborn. I bet a lot of you have played Holborn, yeah? And the back half of the book is all Almains, which are very fun to play. I just got the facsimile of those pieces for my birthday and have been having a great deal of fun playing those Almains from the original notation, which I highly recommend. You can also find them online, but they're not as pretty as what I got for my birthday. Let's look at the section of one of the Holborn Almains that I've put in here as an example. And just look at it for a second and see if you can see what seems to characterize it as this kind of dance. What's most typical in an Almain is that you have strong, weak, weak, strong. Ta-da-ba-ba. Which really isn't that different from what we talked about in the canzone, is it? But in this case, that rhythm is continued throughout as the basic dance rhythm. Let's play that next example.
One, two, 1, 2.
It's so short, I think we should do it again. Why does it feel like a dance instead of like a canzona? Part of it is the great regularity of its shape. Part of it is that it really is felt in 2 rather than in 4. And part of it is that the instruments working together very homophonically give the effect that there's a drum beat going on, even though there's no actual drum playing. Let's find the beginning of that again, if I can find the number. Here we go.
One, two, 1, 2.
I could tell how nicely you were all playing it. There was a certain, your postures changed as though you knew you were walking across the room elegantly. That's very nice. Let's go on to the Night Watch. I bet you've all played the Night Watch at one point or another. One of my favorite of the Holborn Almains. And one of the things that it has in common with the Deering, the little Deering section that we've been looking at, is that it starts with the bass getting our attention and the other parts responding. You see how that's happening? The bass is on the beat. It goes 2, 1 and gets us going, and everybody else responds to the bass. If you're ready, let's play it.
1, 2, 1.
Kind of makes you want to play the whole thing, doesn't it? It's too bad it was so short, but that gives you the idea. Now let's go and return to the section of the Deering, which tastes like a little piece of Almain. But we're going to go to the actual score rather than that little rebarred version you had in your examples. Look at your score of the entire Fantasia and look at bar 17. That's the end of the previous section, the canzona-like section that we played before. We're going to start on the 3rd beat of bar 17 and play to the end of this little Allemande section. 3rd beat of bar 17. Here we go.
One, two.
familiar from the other ones that we just played? And did you notice that there was one part that hit the beat exactly and the other ones responded just the same way they did in the night watch? But I told you this would be a very quick chore. So we're going to move on to the next form that shows up in this piece. And that is a madrigal, the Italian madrigal, which did come across the Alps into England and become a very popular form in England. And if we were to talk about the English composer who really took that form and made it a new English style, it would be Wilby. So we're going to look at several examples of sections of Wilby madrigals where the texture, which has been moving quickly, suddenly becomes long and broad. And what we're looking for is how the words of those long and broad sections are reflected in the music that we play. I have to call up the new, okay.
1, 2.
I'll stop you for a second. You'll hear that I speak very slowly in this because I'm trying to emphasize that we're doing something much more broad. Plus, I took it down a half step and that made my voice sound dark. Okay, we're looking at 3 Wilby madrigals, and the first is a 4-part madrigal called Change Me, O Heavens. And before you start playing, think for a moment about your bow directions. There's 2 ways of thinking of it. Is it change me or is it change me, oh heavens? And here we go. Oh.
1, 2, 3, 4.
What's very striking about that is that dropping voice, which is echoed by rising voices. So we have change me going down in the first 2 parts, and then the altus comes in with a rising 6th, and we finally have the cantus come in with a very large leap, so that we begin to see that me is what it's talking about. Change me, oh heavens. How did you feel that affected your bowing? Did you feel that your bow was moving more slowly at the start of the word change and speeding up as you went to the large leap across the strings? Let's play it one more time, thinking about how different your bow feels from what we were just doing playing an allemande.
1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, nice. Let's move on to another example from another Wilby madrigal. This one is a 6-part madrigal, so you have a chance to choose any part that really attracts you. And the text, where most my thoughts, there least my eye, is striking. We're going to do it twice, so you'll have a chance to do 2 different parts if you'd like. And you'll notice that it begins as a trio, and then it opens into more voices. Here we go.
two, three, four.
Choose another part. We'll do it again. I have to find where it is though. Oh, yes.
One, two, three, four.
Okay. You're definitely feeling that your bow is doing something quite different from what it did in the canzona or in the allemande. And partly that has to do with long syllables and multi-syllable words and words that work from one word into the next. Our next example is probably familiar to most of you. It's one of the best known of the Wilby madrigals, Draw On Sweet Night. Think about the words that open this. Sweet night, draw on. So what you see is just 4 big see-through white notes, but the words are not just da, ya, ya, ya. They're sweet night, draw on. And that's helping you to know what your bow is going to do. Ready? Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1.
That familiar to a lot of you? I can't bear how much I love that piece, but what a wonderful one to practice your bowings with. Now we're going to see how that compares to the Deering, why I think of the next section as drawing on, as it were, these sounds and feelings and ways of verbal expression that we just heard in these 3 English madrigals. We're starting at bar 22. So we will be finishing the allemande and then moving into a new section. And what I want you to pay attention to is the challenge of moving from one style of playing into a completely different style. How quickly can you move from evoking a dance to evoking a thoughtful madrigal? So we're starting at measure 22.
1, 2, 3, 4.
All right. Do you feel similarity to the madrigals that we just looked at? Those long lines bending around each other with other lines perhaps running around them. I think it would be a nice challenge for a consort to think what the words of those long phrases might be, so that you could play them the same every time you came to them, if you could imagine what the words were. Finally, one more form we're going to look at is the canzonet. A canzonet is a much simpler form than a madrigal. A madrigal is usually based on a complex, difficult poem with long lines, like a sonnet. But a canzonet is based on simpler poetry with tight little rhythms, usually on less complex ideas than a sonnet would be, and lots of close imitations between parts, lots of playing in thirds and sixths. The ideas are less complex. It's usually, they're a little silly in general. We're going to look at a few canzonets. The first one we're doing, I guess they're all by Morley. Yes, they're all by Morley. And for the most part, I have chosen ones that are in 3 parts because they often are, but just so that you can have something fat and luscious, even though it's silly and light, we're going to start with a 6-part one. Ladies, you see time flieth. And see how this combines some of the shape of speech that we might see in a madrigal, but also with the shorter, more flighty, less important notes of a dance movement. And you'll also see there's a lot of repetition of text. Nothing very important is being said, and lots of imitation. And so you should be ready to play your canzonet examples now. Here is the first of them.
1, 2, 3, 4.
One of the things I find amusing about that is it begins as a big 6-part texture saying the word ladies, and you think maybe this is going to be a serious madrigals, and then it just gets silly after that. Let's move on to the next 2 examples, which are 3-part and 4-part. The first of them is, oh, fly not, oh, take some pity. Choose one of the parts. Bass players, if you don't read C clef, it would be fine for you to play one of the high parts low, because nobody else can hear you from here. You're on your own. Here we go with oh, fly not.
One, 2, 3, 4.
Pretty silly. One of the things that is nice about it, though, is the way the upper parts echo each other very closely, and the octave leaps, which are lots of fun. Let's go on to the next one. And this one is my heart, why hast thou taken? Now that last one had a bunch of upward moving lines. Now we're going to have a bunch of downward moving lines, as though one part was chasing after the next.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now I chose that for an example because it's the end of a light, jolly piece, and its way of concluding is going to sound very familiar when you get to the daring, with all of these chasing scales one after the next. Finally, we're going to end with arise, get up, my dear. And once again, this is the end of the piece. Lots of chasing parts.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay. I have to turn off this phone. Hold on. All right. Now let's look at how all that you've heard in these canzonets is reflected in the last part of the Deering. Look at bar 40. We're going to play from bar 40 to the end. Give you a second to get out your Deering and find bar 40. Okay, here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1.
Yeah. Was anybody tripped up by those octaves? Anybody have trouble making the? I'm glad to see somebody admitting to it because they can be a little bit complicated. If you didn't have the low note of the octave, let's just look for a second at the top treble part at the very beginning of the section we just did. So bar 40 into 41. In 41, we have da 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 da. If you left out the low octave, it would just be da 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 da. That'd be simple, right? It's the drop that's hard. If you were bowing it, you would be going F G A G F E, right? So keep that same bowing. F G A, and now do pull, pull. So do both the bottom of the octave and the top of the octave on a pull together. That way you can drop to the lower string and just return to where you were in the same place you would have been if it had just been a dotted note. Do you want to give that a try for a second? Make sure you got that. Push, pull, push, pull, pull, push. Then it's as though you're just tapping the lower string for a moment and returning to where you were. Let's just play that last section one more time. This is from 40 to the end. And feel free to enjoy intensifying as you go along, as you did in the canzonet when you just said the same thing over and over again. Whatever it is you're thinking, imagining yourself saying here, you're just saying it in a more and more insistent way. Let's see. That would be here. Okay, 40 to the end. And did you notice that we're really starting on after the rest? So I'm giving you one as a silence and then you play after the rest. Okay. too soon.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1.
Excellent. All right. So now we're ready to do the whole fantasy. I did re-record it for you at 4:15, so it won't be all burbly and bubbly this time. This should be a bit more of a proper recording. Because we're doing this over Zoom on GarageBand recording, there's no room for rubato, which we might have if we were playing in a group. But I'm not actually bothered by not having a retard at the end. It seems to work quite well to just keep insisting, and finally coming to an end. So get out your deering, and we're getting ready to play the entire thing. And I think we're going to have time to play it twice. So if there are two different parts you'd like to play, you're going to have the opportunity. Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4.
right, one more time. Choose another part. Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Well done, everybody. That brings us to the end of our hour. But this would be a lovely time for anybody who wanted to ask questions or share thoughts or anything. If you have something to say, feel free to unmute and chime in.
I really enjoyed hearing the similarities between the different parts and the phrases echoing each other. So thank you for that.
Oh, good. Excellent. That's what we're after. Yes. What else? I see a finger up.
Yeah, may I?
Yes.
I'm from Italy, and tomorrow we are giving a concert with the Fantasias, 2 by Birds and 1 from Cofrario. Okay, now today with you I learned that the Fantasia by Cofrario is just from a canzona. Ta 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 ta. Whereas, whereas the 2 by Birds, they both of them start like ta 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 ta, and I don't know where are they from, but I suppose they are both of them. They are original by Birds, not from Italian material.
Well, his fantasies often sound like a texted piece that just doesn't have a text. And actually, so does Coprario. Many of the Coprario pieces, texts have now been associated with, and we know that a number of them, partly because of research that our colleague Brent Wisick has done, that a number of them are based on Italian poems from what's that big long poem that takes that I can't think of it right now. It will come back to me. But yes, both Coprario and Bird wrote instrumental pieces that very much were in the style of their vocal pieces, and even the Coprario beginning it was probably thought of as having a text. Hannah was asking if Fantasias ever had a text as well. Some of them, well, a number of the pieces that we used to play thinking that they were Fantasias actually turned out to be madrigals that had not yet been associated with those pieces. The later we get in the English fantasy repertoire, the more likely it is that they never had texts, that the ranges are way too big to have been sung. But the earlier Jacobean ones are much more likely to be within a vocal range. You get to Laws and Jenkins, you don't want to sing those. Anybody else? Yes. Now who is that? That's Elizabeth, right?
Deering was a very obvious composer to have chosen to show your thesis because of his work in Italy. I'm wondering if you can use exactly the same things with somebody who never left the country, like Jenkins, for example.
You absolutely can. I can say that as somebody who has been teaching this repertoire for 40 years and more, that you're going to find this kind of material reflecting things that the composer heard. Now for Jenkins, it would be slightly later things that Jenkins would have heard than what Deering would have heard. But all of their fantasies tend to reflect kinds of music that they would have been familiar with elsewhere. So yes, you can apply it all the time. Even Purcell, because Purcell's kind of backward looking in his fantasies. Roy looks as though he wants to say something, but I'm not sure about that. No. I did want some of whatever you were eating, Roy. It looked delicious.
I'd just like to say what a lovely time I've had. Thank you very much indeed.
Oh, I'm delighted. I'm very glad. You looked as though you were having a good time playing, which is so nice. The thing that is striking about fantasy repertoire is whoever spoke first about how, I think that was Allison, was talking about how they could hear the lines going back and forth between people. That's exactly what it's about. It's very much like a dinner table conversation among people who feel like equals, who enjoy each other's wit, who sometimes like to contradict each other, but in the end, always agree in a nice cadence. So if you can feel that dinner table feeling while you're playing a fantasy, you're in a very good place. Did anyone else want to chime in about anything? Well, I hope that I get to play with you in person next time. That would be lovely too. Allison,
Can I just say, I've noticed in the chat there's a question about whether the fantasies ever had text. Did you answer that already?
I did actually.
Sorry,
yes,
sorry.
I jumped in about some, when you look at the, what is the manuscript that was mostly copied in prison?
The Tredian.
Yeah, the Tredian manuscript, there were pieces in there that we thought were fantasies for a long time that eventually were found to have been madrigals originally. But Tredian didn't care about the words. He was busy wanting to play the viol, so didn't bother to copy them in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But a few of those, like few Ward and Coprario, people have actually published the text for one or two of each of those, haven't they now?
That they have, and Brent Wissick has found some additional ones for some of the Coprarios.
Yeah.
And some of you may have met Hannah and Martha Davidson. They were both wonderful amateur players here in the Boston area. And Martha in particular, they're gone now, which is a shame. They were delightful people to make music with. And Martha, I was once doing a workshop on playing words and how English fantasies just seem to be built on English word structure. And it was a 2-day workshop, and she went home that evening and wrote an entire text to the fantasy we were working on that worked as a poem and with all the word shapes and phrases. Where it was fantastic. And that's kind of a lovely exercise to give yourself if you're ever stuck on a desert island. I just noticed that Mylin is here. It's great to see you. Mylin, are we going to see you at Conclave this year? Yes, excellent. Well, I hope to see many of you over the summer or at other times. I'll turn it over to Francis to wrap up, I guess.
Well, I'm not sure there's much to say other than to thank you very much, Sarah, for a really interesting talk. To reiterate for anyone who missed them, Ibby's apologies that he's performing at the British Library or the British Museum. I forget which one of those. So I'm is a rather inadequate stand-in. So there's going to be a recording made of this. So if anyone wants to see it again, we'll hope to be making that available with a bit of luck. And apart from that, I think it's just how lovely to see you all here. Thank you very much for coming, and we'll call it a day. Okay.
Thank you all. Lovely to see you. Bye-bye now.